Yes, welcome back to Game Week 6 preview with myself, Nolezy, one half of the FPL Draft Duo. Today we are going through everything FPL Draft Mode. Starting off with Jacksies stats sections, we're going to look at some minutes from the weekend. We're then going to go on to listener questions and look at this or that dilemmas. We're going to look at some waiver options in all areas and give us the best options short term and long term. So let's get into it. So starting off with Jacksy's stats section, and we're looking at players' minutes. We're looking at players that are risks, players that are getting slightly more minutes, players that are getting considerable minutes, and then also nailed players. Let's start off with our players that have minutes risks. And top of that list is Minte, 28 minutes at the weekend, benched. I kind of expected that, but I still think he's a decent pick for the rest of the season. I expect him to come back in. Adingra wasn't great, so a lot of questions in about Minte. I would hold and definitely don't sell right now. Don't trade. His value is very low. If you're wavering, if it's for someone good, fair enough. But I still think there's more left in Minte. Kevin Shade. So Kevin Shade, disappointing one if you picked him up. 27 minutes. But again, I think it's similar to Minte. I think right now they look like low picks, but keep the faith. I think Shadow will play a considerable amount of minutes over the next while and be a decent pick. Diaz has been one of the most frustrating picks for me personally. I keep holding on to him. Got the benching, and although I do still think he'll come back into the team, I think he's got to be a drop. Matson and Digne both 45 minutes. Matson played this week in the EFL Cup during the week. Played okay. I think he's going to come into it once we just give up hope, which I think is now. We can't really justify holding Matson right now. It might be a game week or two before he gets in. If he's still there, fantastic. But it looks like he's always going to fight with Digne. Jota, 0 minutes. We're going to talk about him later. Mateta and Alanga, 45 minutes. Again, we'll mention them. Players that got slightly more minutes that could be options in the future. Sancho, 57 minutes. Suchek, 52. Suchek subbed on in the first half for Rodriguez, likely to get the start next game week. Nketiah, 66, and Archer, 58 minutes. Archer's had a couple of early subs. It's hard to justify him as your striker option. Now, players that are getting slightly more minutes that are good, decent options, but I suppose we have to monitor them as well. Adama Traore, 74 minutes. Paqueta, 72 minutes. Johnson, 70 minutes, who we'll talk about in this week's episode. Madison with 88 minutes. Brilliant player. Unbelievable underlying stats this season. And then we're finishing off with Dibbling, Gordon, and Ndai, all around the 80-minute mark and great options going forward. And here are our 90-minute men, players that have been nailed recently. Long list, some good options in there, and a lot of them we will discuss in this week's episode. Gravenverch, Mavi Didi, Madueke, Lewis Potter, Tavernier, Bowen, Kulusevski, Bruno, Hudson Odoi got 90, Barnes, Sugawara, Faze Zabarni, Diego Carlos, and Mazraoui. We are actually going to mention the vast majority of these players in one way or another in this week's episode. So make sure to stay tuned and see where we rank them. Before we get on to our fixtures, we're going to have a look at some notable stats from the weekend. Defenders' chances created. We're looking at Davis and Dallo, both on 3. Davis, he's not mentioned in our waivers. He was mentioned the last 2 weeks. He is still a great hold. He has been really attacking. We can christen him now the new Dowhy. And if you have him, I've seen a lot of people wavering him out. He's still definitely worth a hold. Dallo created 3 chances and always racking up them bonus point. Dallo is a great hold also. Defender goal attempts. Delit, 3. Anderson, 3. And 8, Nori, 3. We are going to highlight 8 Nori in the podcast also. And then corners. Davis on 10 corners and a Stupinan 6. So all the stats line up for Davis still being a very good hold, regardless of some tough fixtures. And a Stupinan got the start. 6 corners, didn't play amazing. So I did say hold last week. If you want to trade him this week, I think that might be a good option if someone thinks that he's back. They have some other options at left wing back. Great to see him start. I just wasn't crazy impressed by his performance. His position was great, but still question marks over him. And then shots in the box. Brennan Johnson, 6. Barnes 4, DCL 5, and Jimenez 4. So again, Brennan Johnson's coming up, who we'll talk about in the future. And to finish up on Jacksies stats section, we're going to look at some notable stats from other players. Ironically, all of these players are mentioned in the waivers. Sugawara in defence, 90 minutes, but conceded in the 95th minute. Would have been a great result on the waivers. Still very impressed by this man. In midfield, Dibbling, 1 goal, 1 big chance created, and passes the eye test. Got 82, I think it was 82 minutes, as we said previously. Mavididi, I know I'm saying that name wrong. If anyone can give me the pronunciation, that would be great. 1 goal, 1 big chance created, and he has had 2 goals in 2 games. Semenyo continues his fine form, 4 shots, 1 disallowed goal, and he's having 4.8 shots per game. Insane stats from Semenyo. And then finally for forwards, Ndiaye, 1 goal, super fixtures, increased minutes, and then finally our boy Raul Jimenez, 1 goal, 3 shots in the box, 5 aerial duels, 1. So he looks like he is going to remain the main man for Fulham for the foreseeable future. And as always, we will look at FPL consults and FPL eras fixture ticker over the next 6 game weeks. One thing I wanted to note is how quickly this can change. Villa were midway in this last week, and now they're gone after 1 fixture. So what I saw someone doing on Twitter, and again, what you can do yourself, it's fairly easy, is to look at players and put your own ranking on them, rating on them. FPL General was only talking about it this week, about how there's no such thing as one. Whereas if you look at possibly an Ipswich or Southampton, that could be 1 on the FDR. So you might want to make your own. If we look at some of the best ones, we will talk an awful lot about them, but Everton, fantastic run of fixtures. Palace and Newcastle, relatively okay, and then Ipswich, Fulham, Southampton, and West Ham. Again, when you look at them, 5 green fixtures out of 6. Palace, not an easy side. Fulham, definitely not an easy side, and West Ham, by 5 or 6 game weeks' time, could be a totally different team. So we are really kind of looking for them really, really good games, and then them statistics that, like, let's say West Ham are playing Brentford. Brentford have one of the worst away records in terms of XGC this year. So don't just take it as greens, reds, whatever. We have to look slightly deeper into it, and we are going to do that with particular teams in the waiver section. Listener questions now. Thank you as always for sending them in. If you are not following or subscribed, please do so. It's only 2 seconds for you, but it really, really helps us. And yeah, it's nice to see the engagement for the last couple of weeks. If you're not subscribed, please do so. It costs literally nothing. Thank you for sending the questions in on Twitter and Instagram, FPL_draft_duo. I'm going to go through them, some of them, and give answers now. And throughout the podcast, I'm essentially going to answer the other ones with this or that dilemmas. So listener questions, dilemmas, and then this or that. Let's start off with the top left one, the first one. I think it's a fairly simple one. Hold Wissa or pick up Ferguson/Jimenez. I think it's definitely worth picking up a Jimenez for Wissa right now. We are unsure exactly how long it's going to be, but Jimenez firing on all cylinders, definitely a good replacement. I wouldn't do it for Ferguson though. Being offered Madueke for Rodgers, stick with Rodgers. We will answer that in the next slide. Livramento, keep or transfer out. Edouard, keep or transfer out. I think with Livramento, Newcastle have been very poor. Trippier's getting in and out as predicted, play some games and not others. So I wouldn't be a fan of Livramento for now. Edouard, I think if you picked him up, keep him. I think that probably means that, you needed an extra spot. Now, if in the waiver section for the forwards, there's a better forward that is still on the waiver, I'd pick him up. But I think Edouard will be good or will come good very soon. Reece James is in my bench, but I'm done waiting on news. Thoughts on dropping? I think if you've waited this long, maybe give it a week or two. I actually don't know. I haven't looked into Reece James about his injury, but like if you've waited this long and it hasn't really affected your team, maybe just give it a week or two. But we probably know what's going to happen. You know the drill. Keep Fulkrug or pick up and die. I would be picking up and die for Fulkrug. We'll talk about him in the waiver section. Someone has wavered out Odegaard. Should I pick him up and wait? Totally depends on your league size and the waivers, but if I would sacrifice an okay midfielder that's going to play for a couple of weeks to have Odegaard for the rest of the season, definitely. What waiver order? Sancho, Kulu, or Gravenberch? I think Kulu, a lot more nails. I'd have to put him first. And then the rest depends on your team. If you're looking for a solid player that we said plays 90 minutes every day, Gravenberch, great pickup. But if you're looking for maybe a high upside player that might, bang 2 goals on any given day, Sancho could be that man. I'm still very, very weary of Chelsea minutes. I've been done by them and it has hurt. Last few, pick up Trippier and drop Burn or stay away from Newcastle defence. I think back to the earlier question, probably stay away from Newcastle defence. And Trippier isn't even that nailed. I know he has been starting some games, but I expect that to be rotation. The rest, apart from Andres, Mavididi, or Carvalho, I'm going to answer later on. Who would I pick out of these three? Andres was whipped slightly early and has been played slightly deeper. Again, I'm going to go short term VDD and long term Andres. Carvalho still an okay pick, but the other two I think are better. So let's get on to our common dilemmas. Looking at some of the common dilemmas or some of the most asked about players this week. Starting off with the most asked about player, Morgan Gibbs White. Should you keep him? A lot of people say they drafted him relatively early, and I think if you drafted him like fourth round, that was probably a good decision. He's been okay. He had one 10-point haul, the rest has been, fairly standard, and he got that red card this week, so you're probably fed up and a bit deflated. Do not worry. I would be keeping Morgan Gibbs White. There's no point putting him on the waiver unless it's a really good midfielder. He's very low trade value, especially after that red card. He is nailed. They have some very good fixtures. They're playing some good football, and he has a low value right now. So what's the point of trading him? Yes, he has been slightly deeper, and he's not on penalties. He's not as good as we thought he would be in terms of FPL draft this year, but he still will be a decent pick long term. And if in a 5 or 6 game weeks time you do want to trade him, hopefully he'll have banged a goal or two by then, and you will have higher trade value. I always, you know, advise against trading players when they're at a low point because, yeah, it's just bad business, bad business. Minte, do you keep or hold Minty? And I briefly touched on this at the start. I think that depends on your league. I think if you are in a slightly larger size league, I would be keeping. I think you will come back into it. If you're in a small size league and maybe you picked him up on the waiver and you don't mind trading him again or putting him on the waiver again, that's okay. But again, depends on who you're trading for. There is some rotation at Brighton, there always will be. But as I said, Adingra wasn't amazing. I still think Minte is the best right winger in that side, and they have no Europe. In a couple of game weeks time, he will be slightly higher value. Now isn't the best time to trade, but if there's a very good waiver on the waiver, not a bad decision. Now, again, someone who we talked about, Madueke. Madueke got the 90 as far as I believe last game week. I am now getting fed up with Madueke because he could have had two very, very good assists to Palmer and didn't give them. Enzo has said that he gave two players in every position, and Madueke and Neto were on the right wing. In my eyes, Madueke was the only out and out right winger, so he had that advantage over everyone. But if Neto comes into it, Madueke's value slightly decreases. I think he's lucky to have the kind of rap sheet that he has the last couple of weeks. I didn't think he was going to start this week, and the fact that he got 90 minutes is very good. If someone wants him in a trade now, I think now is the time to do it before next week, where he possibly might not start for Neto. So Madueke, not a bad time to trade. Still could be a good hold for the rest of the season, but if someone is still looking back at that hat trick and think, oh my god, he could do it next week, and he could, I think maybe cash in. Darwin Nunez. It seems like we talk about him every second week. But again, if you are a Darwin Nunez owner and you've held out, this is the time we've been waiting for. He banged a wicked goal, and I'm again not saying that he's not going to get in that team, but you're probably always going to have a slight headache with Darwin. With Europe and and the amount of attackers that Liverpool have, you're always going to have a slight headache. So if someone is a Liverpool fan possibly, and they see Darwin bang that goal and Jota's having a poor performance, as we're going to talk about next, now could be a time to get a good striker or a playing solid striker over the line. Darwin might go and bang a goal next week, but in 2 weeks' time, he might get that benching, whereas you have that solid pick, Chris Wood or something like that. And on to Diego Jota. He is now a minute's wrist. As we saw, it got 0 minutes. It helped me in normal fantasy. I got Smith Rowe off the bench, but that is always the case with Jota. He has a high ceiling, but he will break your heart at times when he doesn't play. That's why I like to avoid him in the draft, because for me, a solid player is the one that's going to win you the game week, and Jota sometimes can go hot and cold. So again, now is a bad time to trade after a 0 minute game week. In a couple of weeks' time, he will be back, and if you kind of have rode the wave of this kind of up and down Jota, and you're sick of it, you can trade then. But right now is not the best time unless you get a decent trade. And again, that goes for all of them. If I say it's a bad time, but you're getting a good trade, fair enough. Jota will always have a high ceiling, and it's worrying to give him away. But I suppose it's what game you want to play. Do you want to play a kind of conservative game where you have a player that's nailed, or you could go for a Jota who, again, on any given day could score 10 or 12 points and win you a game week. And then finally, Shade, again, slightly disappointing that he didn't start, but I expect him to start the next game. He's some great fixtures, and if he does continuously play up top, he is going to be a good pick. If you're in a large size league, fair, worth a hold. But if you're in a low size league and you thought he was just going to be a striker, midfielder, maybe you can get rid of him. But I would like to think that he will definitely come back into the fray, possibly starting next week. And finally, before we get on to the waivers, we're playing a little game of this or that, starting with Madueke and Rodgers. Again, this one is simple, and you probably can tell from the previous segment that I'm going to go with Rodgers. Finally got that 10-point haul. What a goat. Madueke also is on the downhill, in my opinion. Rodgers is the man. Second up is one we wouldn't usually talk about, or two players we wouldn't usually talk about, Salah or Saka. I think that's, again, very simple. Salah has to be the man, mainly because of trade value. Not only because, obviously, he is the GOAT in terms of FPL. He will get you whoever you want. He could get you to a Haaland, possibly. Whereas a Saka could be tradable for. Saka has got 5 assists, 5 games. Obviously, I have him in one draft. He literally is just guaranteed points. But Salah, in terms of his trade value, is just monumental, and he can change your whole team if you were to trade him. And then we have some City players. Grealish, Savio, Gundo, and Kovacic. 4 very attainable players on the waivers for City. Now, if I'm looking at 2 of these, and again, we'll talk about one of them in more detail, Grealish versus Savio is kind of one for me. The battle of the wingers. Grealish is getting nice minutes, but Savio has that really high ceiling and has been proving it. He's getting way more game time than I thought, so I'd have to go with my boy Savio. And then Gundo versus Kovacic. Someone asked me this on Instagram, and I kind of said Gundo short term, Kovacic long term, and I'd probably have to agree with that. Gundo, while KDB is slightly injured, could have a great upside and a high ceiling. He has been playing in a relatively, advanced position for City, and Kovacic is slightly deeper. But if I was picking a long-term pick, Kovacic with that Rodri injury will probably be guaranteed minutes, which is nearly impossible to say for a City player, and has a good strike, which we'll talk about later on. So if I had to pick 2 from that, in terms of my attacker, my high upside, I'd have to go Savio. But if I wanted to go for a nailed, guaranteed player, Kovacic is the man. On to our waiver section of the podcast, and we are looking at 3 short-term punts for defenders. I suppose the first one is a bit longer term, and it's an Everton defender again. Mykolenko broke our heart last week, but we go back there. Brathwaite for Everton should be back this week, and hopefully that will be the catalyst to solidify Everton's defence. Palace and Newcastle, as we talked about earlier, aren't the easiest fixtures in the world, but they do have Ipswich, Fulham, Southampton, and West Ham. Even if he doesn't keep clean sheets, he has a very, very high expected goal involvement through his head. So I would like to get Brathwaite in. He's probably one of the highest trade values for one of those Everton defenders. So hopefully he can be that catalyst. Second up, again, our boy Sugawara. He has slightly increased his stats from last week, 0.82 xg. 3 big chances created so far. Plays Bournemouth, Arsenal, Leicester. Again, I don't know why I love this guy. If you didn't pick him up last week as a real low level short term punt, he is still a very good option. And then I suppose probably the best in terms of clean sheet, clean sheet probability, is the Barney. He is only equated 0.21 XGI, but he is nailed. And Bournemouth have 2 very good fixtures in a row, both promoted clubs, Southampton at home and Leicester away. I think if you're picking a Bournemouth defender, Zabarny is the easy option. There has been some rotation other places. They aren't even the best defensively. They have good underlying statistics, but if you are playing fixtures, going with someone who's nailed as a Barney is that obvious option. Looking at some defenders that you could trade for, more than likely will be wavered out, but might have a relative low value right now, but I think in the long term will be good. 8 Nori, as Jaxie highlighted, had 3 attempts on goal. Now he's a notoriously bad finisher. But when we look at their fixtures, they have Liverpool, Brentford, and City. So if you own him, maybe he's on the waiver. People aren't looking at him yet. But after that, Brighton, Palace, Southampton, Fulham, Bournemouth, Everton, West Ham. They are all favourable fixtures, somewhat in terms of keeping a clean sheet, but also in the attacking sense. The likes of Everton letting a lot of goals in. West Ham haven't looked amazing. Southampton, Bournemouth in there, all could be got at some stage. And if you're looking for a defender with slightly high upside, maybe you could get him across in a trade. If you're swapping 2 midfielders and a striker, and you just throw in 8 Nori, or you get 8 Nori of them as like kind of under the radar, it could be a nice upgrade on maybe a possible waiver defender. And then obviously Guardiola, not that he's undervalued or not a great player. I just think based on his performances so far, first 5 game weeks, 7, 2, 2, 1, 1. So if someone owns him and they think, oh my God, I've picked a dud here very early, the next 6 fixtures are 4, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2 on the FDR. And that 4 is Newcastle, who they well could keep a clean sheet against. I think I'm expecting like 4 clean sheets from City over the next 6. So if you can get Guardiola, I know you might have to give a bit for him, could be a very good option. And he's going to be a good option long term regardless. Especially with Ake injured, there's less and less players for City. I think he is going to be nailed as per usual. And then Mazraoui, I would be trading away Mazraoui, possibly. Definitely for a Guardiola. So United have actually done very well. A lot of players that are top of my leagues have United defenders in their team. And I just think, how are they getting away with this? I'm watching United games and thinking, Jesus Christ. They've conceded, or they've racked up 6.3 expected goals conceded, and they've only conceded 4 goals. So they're actually over, I don't know how you want to describe it. They're doing better defensively than they should be statistically. And I think that will come to an end very soon. Spurs and Villa in the next 2, I can see them scoring. Brentford, West Ham, Chelsea, I know I'm saying they're not playing well, Brentford and West Ham, but they could score against United. And then they do have a very good trio of fixtures, Leicester, Ipswich and Everton, where they could get 3 clean sheets. But I just think Mazraoui has been really, really hyped in terms of FPL, and he's got an assist. I think he's just been very lucky with points. Maybe it's because I haven't owned him, but I think that he is overvalued. And if you could jump off him at the right time and get onto maybe a Guardiola who's maybe not as highly valued, I think that would be a very good decision going forward. 3 midfielders that are good picks for the rest of the season that could be worth a trade for. I feel like I'm talking about Kudos every week, but he plays in numerous positions. He is underperforming his stats, and I feel there's a haul incoming soon. He is usually one of the best players on the pitch, and I think people are overlooking him right now. He could be a great pick if you're looking to upgrade the midfield, kind of under the radar. Semenyo, everyone knows how good Semenyo is this year, and his stats, his fixtures, they all back him up. He's playing 2 promoted teams followed by 3 very tough fixtures. So maybe if someone owns him, they see them tough fixtures, they want to hop off him. I think getting a Semenyo in your team will be very good. Yes, he got 69 minutes, I think it was last week. I wouldn't be too worried about that. If someone else is, fantastic, get him off their hands. And then finally, someone who I talked about previously in the podcast in terms of chance created, in terms of minutes, Johnson is now preferred right wing for Spurs. Odibert out for long term, therefore he's probably nailed for a while. Yes, he doesn't get the 90 minutes, but he does get the 60, 70. I think for him, that's enough. Banged a goal last week. He only has 2 tough fixtures in the next 11, and that is City and Villa. I think Spurs as an attacking side, they're hard to turn your nose up at. Can't speak today. And their stats back that up. We looked at that last week. They are still relatively high in the expected goals category. So getting a Johnson, Semenyo, or Kudos in your team, adding to your midfield, would be a great decision. Now we're looking at some short-term midfielder waiver pickups. A guy I mentioned briefly in one to watch last week. Again, Mavididi. No, I'm saying it wrong. Banged a goal. Arsenal this week, so maybe he is being overlooked, but then they have a very good run of fixtures. They are a promoted side, so I would recommend maybe as your 5th choice midfielder. If you're in a smaller size league, probably not going to make the cut, but did look good. Has started the last 2 games. That's what I was worried about. I said, give him this game and see how he gets on. I think now is the time to hop on, or else he will be taken in game week 7. Tavernier, most nailed player for Bournemouth for them. 2 very good fixtures, Southampton and Leicester. He actually has impressed me with his stats, 2.7 expected goal involvements on some corners. Always a good player for Bournemouth, but the returns are hard to come by. He seems to just dodge points in the draft, but hopefully over the next 2 games, if you pick him up, he can change that. And then finally, Carvalho of Brentford, some very good fixtures coming up. Started the last day and did look very impressive. I think it was 0.4 expected goal involvements. Can play on the left, can play slightly deeper. So hopefully we will see a bit more of the set and forget Brentford team. There's one more player, Lewis Potter, who we talked about in more detail on our Instagram. So if you are looking for details on Lewis Potter, who I also think is a great pick, hit up our Instagram. Carvalho, Lewis Potter, Shade. It's kind of a fight between them 3 for who's going to be that Brentford asset. If you have either of them, hopefully it will be that one. I like Lewis Potter because he can play a range of different positions. Carvalho, they just bought and can also do that. But I also like Shade because if he plays through the middle, he has the highest expected goal involvements. But Carvalho over the next wide in a large size league will also be a very good option who will get a good chunk of minutes. And finally, midfielders who I think might go under the radar because of their positioning, Kovacic and Menu. We know Rodri's injury is going to be long-term, probably the season. Therefore, Kovacic has really, really gone up in my estimation in terms of minutes. He's featured in all 5 games, played the majority of minutes, 45 in 2 and then 90 in the other 3. He actually has a great strike. And the way City play, he could be camped on the edge of anyone's box and have a pot shot. He's already returned twice this year. So again, if you're looking for someone, stick and forget, he could be that. I'm not saying new Rodri, but he could somewhat replace him. If you did have Rodri, maybe a natural replacement is Kovacic. Menu, on the other hand, I think could change in positioning slightly. If Ugarte plays deeper, Menu might have the license to go forward, and we know his ability. Also has a great strike, also has some high assist potential. Again, if you're looking at Menu, probably a larger size league. I think Menu, unfortunately, is a set and forget as well because you can't really predict what game he's going to return in. So again, a larger size league, 90-minute man. If you are looking for just a 2-pointer every day, he is going to be that man. Hopefully a 3-pointer on some occasions. But 2 players that will go under the radar because of their position, but could come up with a magnificent strike on any given day. And finally, if you are still looking for a whistle replacement or just to upgrade your strikers, here are a few. Form, fixture, and some punts. Form obviously has to be Raul Jimenez. 2 goals, 2 games. We said that he had 5 aerial duels. He had all the stats to back it up. He is slightly overperforming his XGI, but you have to go with a striker in form. I think it's one of the most important statistics in football as a striker. Raul Jimenez is the obvious choice for a lot of people, followed very closely by Ndai. Banged a goal last week. They have a great run of fixtures in terms of attacking potential, and I think he is going to solidify his place down in that team. 2 games started, roughly 80 minutes in both. I think he's a very close second, if not, could challenge Raul Jimenez as a good long term pick. Now, our 3 punts, we have Ferguson, Edward, and Jesus. Ferguson, a lot of questions about Ferguson. If we look at Ferguson as a whole, Pedro just got an injury. I think it was an ankle injury, which could be a couple of weeks. That's a plus. But he's also very injury prone. And Rutter has started 2 games in a row. So Welbeck, obviously, we know is on fire. If we're looking at, starting 11 for Brighton, we're looking at Welbeck up top, possibly Rutter behind. Um, Minte right wing, Mitoma left wing. So Ferguson will get some minutes. I find it hard that Ferguson nails down a position as easy as Ndai or Raul Jimenez. I'd love it, but I just think he has to be down the list. And then Edward is similar. The thing with Edward is he can play number 10, he can play up top, whereas let's say Ferguson is an out and out striker. I think he'll come into the fray slightly more than Ferguson, but Ferguson would have a higher ceiling. And then finally, Jesus. Havertz deeper because of that Odegaard injury could allow him to play. He wasn't preferred against City. Maybe that's tactical. I think if you do get Jesus in, it's going to be, essentially for Odegaard's injury. It's not going to be long term. It's not going to be nailed. But he is playing for a very good side that score goals. So if you want to take the risk on a big team, a big player, he's probably the one to go for in terms of the punts. Edward and Ferguson, larger size leagues, as maybe a replacement for an injured player or someone who hasn't played. More so, if you're looking in any size league, really, to add a striker to your remit, Raul or Ndai are the boys. But that is us for game week 6. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Any like, subscribe, interaction, we highly, highly appreciate. FPL Draft Joe out. Boom.